Now, the divine name is kind of a difficult topic, so you may be aware that it starts already with translation. Does it mean I am who
Well,
I
it's
am?
Jehovah. The
Does
King
it mean
James has it correct, Jamie. It's Jehovah.
does it mean I am who I am? Does it mean I am that which I am, or I will be who I will be, or I will be that which I am? There's a debate. It's the verb is the imperfect, but
Right.
perfect can be future, but it can also be used in a sort of habitual way that characterizes the ongoing kind of something. Um, I, I'm still trying to figure out all the details of what it means, and one of the interesting things that has been very poorly explored is the fact that this is not the first time in history that we've seen being language applied to a god. There's a whole Egyptian source here going back to what was written inside the pyramids 1,000 years before Moses, that plays with being and non-being language. I've listed some of the examples in the chapter, but I keep finding more, and and we're going to have to talk about a lot of contrast too. So definitely, we have this mysterious phrase that has something to do with being, and what's interesting about it is that it seems like you're just predicating predication. I am that which I am. Not in normal language, you usually follow I am with some kind of limiting
Yeah.
limiting phrase that limits it down to you're this.
Well, sentences have parts. You have subjects, you have verbs, you have objects, right? The name doesn't seem to have all that. Now, of course, you could read a lot into that, but yeah, that's really interesting.
And I think sometimes we might get too hung up on it being a to be verb as well. And so certainly one strand of interpretation that would follow, and a lot of other people would be that, this ego eimi haon, I am the existent one, thinking, very platonically. And it's not actually crazy because it when Jesus appropriates the I am statements, he says something pretty similar. At the same time, the focus might be on the I part of it, that what we're actually doing, we're saying God is himself. And what we mean by that is that there's a certain there's an absolute continuity of God with himself. He doesn't change from one moment to the next. He's perfectly self-consistent at all times. And so that might be more what it's saying. I'm not sure I've completely made my mind up about what the right way to talk about it in context is. I think is a place of ongoing research for me. But what I do think we should notice is that it has to be something metaphysical. We're talking about being, and again, this is not anachronistic. It might be anachronistic to just take Parmenides and Plato as the context for this, sure. But there is a whole language and discourse about being that already exists in Egypt. And so when we get to the Bible, it's not like people in that culture were unable to understand or think in terms of a serious metaphysical statement about God. We can have, God in revealing himself in this way is actually revealing himself in a perfectly culturally appropriate manner.
That's an important point too.
So the god Khepri, who is depicted as a scarab beetle, is also the rising sun. So the sun in its rising, we might call him Ra or Atum in different aspects, but in the rising sun, we call him Khepri. And Khepri is actually an Egyptian verb to be or to become. And so Khepri represents the god who brings himself into existence out of the primeval waters, which are described as non-existence or non-being. And then through his bringing himself into existence, he gives existence. So same verb, but with a causative prefix to everything else which has existence. There's a whole long phrase, the one who, Khepri, the one who came into existence and through coming to existence brought everything which exists into existence.
So they're reading Thomas then, and his first concept.
Yeah, and this is again, we can find this in and we find this in like a New Kingdom funerary text, so potentially contemporary with Moses. There's people talking this way, and so the similarities and the differences are both interesting to notice. First of all, you have this God who is defined by being in some way and gives being to everything else, which is that's very striking language. At the same time, he definitely has a backstory, because there's a point when he was not, and then he brought himself into existence. So that's a point of contrast with what we've been saying about the God of the Bible. And then, of course, Khepri fits into the whole story of the sun god with, like I said with Autumn before, bringing into his two children, his son and daughter, into existence and all the rest. So he is still in some way dependent on what he brings into existence. So what I think that illustrates is that we should read Exodus 3 as making a serious metaphysical statement. Um, and we have good grounds for thinking that's not anachronistic. I mean, at the same time, we also want to highlight the differences. If anything, it's a higher statement because we have a God who there's no story about how he came into being, and so it makes a lot more sense to read the divine name simply as something like the existent one or the one who's self-consistent. And then he gives this other becoming is entirely in the realm of the things he brings into being. He gives being to everything else, but he doesn't have to create himself.